All right, everyone, let me formally welcome you all to this webinar on answering your most important questions about test automation. Really appreciate you guys taking your time out to attend this webinar, and we would be really glad to help you out in any questions that you may have around automation testing and around any testing related area that you want. So to give a quick introduction about the speakers today, joining us right now is Cornia Pip. She is a automation tester with expertise around Java, Selenium, TestNG, and everything related to test automation. She has around 12 plus years of experience in testing, test automation, and has been working in different type of industries as well. So for example, Corina has experience in gaming industry, in aviation, in multiple areas. So all in all, she is an expert on automation engineer. So myself, I am Mudit Singh. I would be hosting this webinar today for you guys. I am Director Product and Growth at LambdaTest. So if you have any questions related to LambdaTest or how LambdaTest can help you around the automation, I would be the guy who would be answering those kind of questions, right? So I would be, so the agenda of today's webinar would be again around automation testing. So Corina would be helping us out in any questions that you may have around test automation. We did a kind of a survey in the beginning before starting this webinar for the whole week, where we kind of asked all the burning questions that users or automation testers may have around the space, and a few of them we have collected as well, and Corina would be sharing her experience around this part. We'll be also going into the best practices around test automation and test automation coding. I would be also taking few questions and a little bit of demo for around LambdaTest for those of you users who are not very familiar with it. And at the end of this session, we'll be doing a Q&A session, a very interactive Q&A session. So if you have any questions right now, feel free to ask it in the chat area. We have a Q&A area in the Zoom app where you can use this feature to ask any questions or around, right? So feel free to ask any questions that you may have. So yeah, so that is basically from my side. Corina, I think it's all over to you. Let me stop my sharing screen, then you can start from your side.
Awesome, let's see. Okay, can I get just a sign from you if you can actually see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. Awesome.
All right, so hi everyone, I am Corina. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for joining me for this webinar. Yes, so as was mentioned earlier, I have done a lot of automation during the past years. My favorite kinds of automation is probably front end. So I've done a lot of Selenium based automation. And I did work in various types of companies and various types of projects. And I've seen all kinds of automation gone bad or automation gone really, really awesome. So I can share from my experience, and hopefully this webinar will be useful for you. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Twitter. I have a blog where I write about testing. I have a lot of Selenium articles there. I also have a comic series, which comes out every Monday about a team that works in Agile. And of course, the tester is the main character there. And I also have some projects on GitHub if you're interested in taking a look there. So everything automation, here is where you can find it. Now, in the first part, I would like to focus on some of the questions we got either in the registration process for this webinar or just some frequent questions I have, I receive or I've heard around and so on. I do have some slides, but then I will want to take over some of your questions. I noticed that we already have at least one, so awesome. Keep them coming. And let me just get into the whole discussion by starting with this question, which is, do I need to be an automation engineer? So this is a question I hear quite a lot. Let me tell you my story, first of all. How did I become an automation engineer? I was way back in the day working for a company where I was a manual tester. it was already my third company, so I had done some manual work earlier. But from one day to the other, the company just told us that we need to start doing everything in an automated fashion. So our projects needed to go full automation for business reasons, and so I had to start learning. Otherwise, I would have had to leave the company. I actually really loved where I was working, so I started, learning automation, of course, with what we needed to learn at that time. I did have some background from the university, but it wasn't that much, and especially there was nothing around automation or testing in my university background. So for me, it was a challenge to start learning from scratch. So in my example, I started being an automation because I loved my workplace and I was really curious about doing automation. Having said that, you don't necessarily need to be an automation engineer. There are many companies out there and many um, employers that can hire you as a manual tester if that is what you want to be. So no problem there. You don't have to be an automation engineer if you really don't like it. But sometimes certain companies heavily have to rely on automation because of their domain and because of the large capacity that they need to support. For example, they have a large base of users, so they have like millions of users maybe, or it's just that they have a lot of transactions going on, like thousands of transactions per second. This might be like gaming types of companies or maybe financial companies. And for that kind of a domain and for that kind of a company, you do need to rely heavily on automation. It's very, very important to have that at your disposal. So having said that, it depends, it really depends on what you want to do. If you want to work for such a, high volume, very interesting and tough domain type of company, then you should probably learn automation. If not, you could just, continue doing your manual work on a different type of project. But if you think about automation, it's not just useful for testing. You can automate some of your frequent tasks, and sometimes I do that. For example, if there are some things I have to do like every week or every day and they take up a lot of my time or they are very unpleasant to do on a daily basis, I will think about doing some kind of automation for those. So it really helps to kind of have an automation background in order to actually make your work and your life easier, to automate some of your unpleasant tasks. Now, how can I choose my framework or a tool to learn automation if I do want to start learning automation? So the first thing you might need to consider is, does your current project require you to do some sort of automation? Are there any specific requirements for that project? For example, is there a specific programming language that the automation requires? Or are there certain tools that are enabled already for your project? This way, if you would have such a project already, it would be easier for you to get a head start because you would have like a daily goal. You would know that you need to automate your daily work and that these are the tools and the frameworks you need to focus on. So this way your learning process would be focused on that, that requirement of your job, right? So this would be really easy because then you know exactly that you can apply what you're learning on a daily basis and you don't really forget what you're learning. You're doing it every day. But if you don't have such a project yet, but if you want to get into automation at one point, first of all, you need to consider whether you want to go the path of learning code or if you prefer to use a tool for which you don't need to learn any kind of coding. There are many tools out there that can help you with automation in this case. So based on these two criteria, you can try to explore some of the most used frameworks or tools or programming languages and pick whatever you feel is the best fit for you. Maybe, for example, I like Java. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to learn Java because maybe you just don't like it. Maybe you prefer something else. So it's good for you to experiment in order to find out exactly what you prefer and what is easier for you to learn and what is more convenient for you. What is your feeling about all of these tools? And of course, you need to evaluate where you want to go. What do you want to do? What is your goal? You need to have daily goals or weekly goals or something like that in order to actually get you working on your automation. So just learning, just reading some documentation is not going to help you. You need to create some goals for yourself, because based on your goals, you will start building and implementing your automation. So let's say you want to automate a certain page that you've, like the login to a certain page that you've visited. You can create a goal and a goal that you set for yourself. And so you can try to automate this goal in certain ways. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, connection is unstable apparently. So
Yes.
you can try several approaches to get to your task being done, and you can choose from the approach that you preferred the most when you build that which you were trying to build. The truth is, many times you will have to learn in your spare time. So probably at work, if you don't really have an automation oriented project, you will not have that much time allocated to you. Maybe, the project managers and whoever is in charge of you will say, you need to focus on your daily tasks. Right now, we don't have the goal of automating anything, so you can't learn at work. But don't be discouraged by that. Learn in your spare time and just do this for yourself. Like if you are very keen on doing automation, even though your current project doesn't really allow you to or support automation, do it on your own spare time. And trust me, it's going to eventually make a difference. It's going to help you in the future to maybe switch to a different project or to, implement automation from scratch on your own project. Why not? Okay. What would be a tool or a framework that you could learn? So this is a question I get a lot, but here honestly, there's like no good answer. There are many out there. There are various programming languages that are, very useful for different areas maybe. For example, Python is very much used these days for AI stuff. Java is, of course, it's been here for a very long time, and it's very spread across all of the automation projects across the world. So it's very popular. So these, for example, for coding, these two would be my personal recommendations if you want to learn a programming language. But again, it all depends on your preference. But these two are something you can try, you can start with. See if you like them, and if not, maybe pick something else. But these are the top notch, the two ones that I currently see being used frequently. So this means you have a lot of support, you have a lot of information, you have a lot of documentation, examples, and a lot of people who can help you in case you want to get started with automation. So there is quite a community of people who know Java and people who know Python. On the other hand, if you don't want to learn programming, but you want to do automation using some kind of tools, you can take a look at the following. So for Selenium, you can use, of course, the Selenium IDE, which is built as part of the Selenium project. If you're looking into doing API testing, Postman is a very good tool for that. And if you're looking for tools that can help you with several things, like all-arounders, let's say, you can take a look at the following tools, which are Test Project, Tricentis Tosca, and Catalan Studio. Some of them are free. One, at least, I think is paid, but they all have support for various technologies that you can use. For example, Test Project uses Selenium. I mean, you can do web UI testing, you can do mobile testing. So they offer support for all kinds of automation. So these are really, really good. Of course, again, this is up to you. It's up to your preference. Try them out and see what is best for you. And another, like an aspect you can consider when you want to learn something is, how do you actually get started learning them? Where would you find the information for learning these? And always start with the official documentation. If the official documentation is not that good, then maybe the tool is not really, worth learning. Usually good tools have very good official documentation. So you should be able to find the most important things and the most important and easy to understand information in the official documentation. That is because the people who write these documentations are the people who actually implemented the tools. So they know best, what the tool is all about. So official documentation is number one when it comes to starting learning anything, not just automation. But in general, official documentation is the best place to start. And after you're done with that, if you want to learn more, and of course, if you want to see more examples and so on, there are all kinds of online trainings that are available. For example, you have the Test Automation University, which is free. Then you have Udemy, you have LinkedIn Learning, and of course, then you have blogs, conferences. Many of the conferences, of course, in this period are online or hybrid kind of events. So you can easily take part in these conferences wherever you are. You might even have access to the presentations afterwards, so you can revisit the topics that are discussed in conferences, and you can start, applying what you've seen there, and doing or trying to do your automation while at the same time following the videos to get them help you do your automation. So these are some very good resources. And last but not least, you can get very good help from developers. Of course, if mostly in cases where you're actually doing automation based on a programming language. Because when you're going to work, most of the times when you're going to work on an automation project at work, the project uses probably the same programming languages as the developers do. It doesn't really make sense for the code project to be in a language and for the automation project to be in a different language. So then you and the developers are doing very similar things, and if you're stuck anywhere when it comes to the coding, you can easily talk to your developers, because you are in the same company, you're working on the same project, so it's easier for them to help you out, because first of all, they're close by, or like somewhat close by during this time, and because they know what you're referring to, so they have an idea about what you're trying to do, and they can give you really, really good pointers and really, really good tips in writing your code. But coming back to like what frameworks and tools would you learn? Now, as I said, there is no good response here. I also got a question regarding, how can I create a framework? And based on these two questions, I created this slide where I will share which is my favorite setup for doing automation, which are my favorite languages and frameworks for doing automation. And I will explain a little bit about how you can actually create a framework. So a framework, from my perspective, it's basically just a project. It's like a container where you can create code, where you create automation code. This project, you can think about it like a GitHub project, because every time you're going to create an automation project, which is based on a programming language, you will have to upload it to a VCS, like GitHub or Perforce or SVN, whatever you're using, so a version control system. And so each project is going to be a framework, let's say. How can you configure the framework? So starting from the actual, let's say, structure. Here you can use Maven. Maven is very good at creating basic quick start type of projects. So if you, let's say, want to create a project where you want to do Selenium, and if you want to use Java for that project, you can easily create a Maven project. For example, if you're using an IDE like IntelliJ, you have an option to create it from a screen there, and it will just create the entire structure of the project, which means you will have folders there, and you will have the central piece of Maven, which is the POM.xml file. That file is going to be where you're going to specify what libraries or frameworks you want to use in your automation. So the POM.xml file is like where you will define all your dependencies. They are so-called dependencies, like Selenium, for example. So if you go to the POM.xml file and you specify that you want Selenium, it will be automatically downloaded for you, and your framework already allows you to create Selenium tests, because at the time you already have access to all of the Selenium code. So all of the Selenium library, which contains those methods for opening a page, clicking on a button, and so on and so on. So Maven easily allows you to create the framework because it creates the folder structure and the POM.xml file you need. It also has some plugins for running tests, but yeah, that's like it's a very long story here. But the idea is that it can create the backbone for your framework. And what you add to the framework then is really up to you. My favorite setup here that I have on this slide contains the library or the framework Selenium for web UI testing. It also contains the Appium framework for mobile testing. Appium is also good because not only does it do mobile, it also allows you to test some desktop applications. Last time I used it, for example, was for Windows applications. So it's very, very good. If you want to also test API, you can import your REST assured library into your project. Again, all of these are done easily just by specifying an entry in the POM.xml file. If you're curious about how to do this, just go to the Maven official documentation, official site, and you will see it's really, really easy to do. So basically in like maybe 5 minutes, you can create a structure with folders and with 3 libraries that I already mentioned available for your tests. So all of these mobile tests can be created already because you already have access to the Appium code because you have imported it into your Maven project. Of course, you will need to do some further setup for your phones, for emulators and so on, but you will have access to all of the code. So this is how you actually get started. This is how you will create your, let's say, placeholder for creating these 3 types of tests. If you want, I mean, normally, what do? When we create the tests, we need to be able to like write them somewhere. So we need to create test classes. I know that many testers or most of the testers are using TestNG for creating their classes, creating their at test annotations, creating their at before class and so on annotations, and for running their tests. However, personally, I prefer JUnit 5. It's very similar to TestNG, but as you probably already know, testers are more focused on TestNG and developers are using JUnit. I'm using JUnit 5, which is different from, for example, JUnit 4, which is an earlier version of JUnit, because it has very many great features. I really love how easy it is to work with. So if I were to choose between JUnit 5 and TestNG, this would be my preferred setup. That doesn't mean TestNG is bad. No, they're a bit different, but this is just the one I would prefer. Another 2 very useful frameworks, which are not necessarily focused on testing, but are helping with the testing, are Spring and Apache Commons. I use Spring mostly for working with a database because they have a very good class called JDBC template, which allows you to easily connect to the database, whether it's an SQL database or something else, and to query the database or to, query meaning, you want to retrieve some data, or it helps you easily insert something into the database, update a row, and so on with just 1 line of code. So it's really, really easy. You have a very small setup that it needs in order to configure the database you want to point to. But apart from that, doing the actual queries to the database it's very, very easy. You just write 1 line of code and you execute a huge statement. And then you can even process the response. You can extract, for example, if your response is rows and columns, you can extract all kinds of things like all of the rows, all of the columns, just 1 entry, which is on a certain row and column, and so on. So it's very, very useful, very powerful. Another thing I use Spring for, which is very, very useful, it's working with environments. So Spring allows you to define 1 file for each environment where you want to run your tests. This is a properties file. So property files are just key value pairs, or they comprise of key key values. Okay, you know what I mean. So it's a file which has keys and values, right? This is a property file. For example, one of the properties could be the URL of the environment. So in each of these files, you will specify which is the URL. From a configuration in the test, you can easily switch between the environments, and you can just say, I want to go to a certain environment, and you specify a short name for the environment, and that short name needs to be the same as the name of the file. If you want to open the URL for that, like the home page, let's say, of that environment, you just need to read the URL property from the corresponding file. And in the test, you don't really care about what environment you're on. You just know that you're opening a URL. And the configuration and the wiring behind it is going to choose which is the URL that you're using based on what is the environment you want to run. So you don't need to create environment-specific tests because you just create the test you want to run, and easily you can switch between all of the environments that you have. So as I said, I'm just giving you some pointers. Please look it up, or ask me afterwards for resources or how to get started with all of these. The last library I want to mention here, the Apache Commons, is basically a collection of all kinds of helper code. It has methods for helping you generate random strings, for example, in all kinds of formats, like maybe you just want random numbers, like maybe just random characters. Maybe you want to work with strings in a sense that you need to extract some substrings out of a string based on certain characters or based on certain substrings that are in that string. So it's very, very powerful when it comes to extracting and parsing and retrieving information from strings. It also has code for working with files easily. For example, you can, with one line of code, read the entire contents of a file. Like each line of the file can be set into a list of strings. So you can have a list of strings, and each string corresponds to one line in the file, and all kinds of useful things. For example, for copying folders, copying files, moving them around. And yeah, very, very easy to work with, one-liners, very, very good. So these are very useful libraries. So these are the tools, actually the frameworks or the libraries that I prefer to use. And I also added IntelliJ here. Why? Because IntelliJ, my IDE that I use for creating the code, is very, very important to me on a daily basis. It helps me a lot to, be more efficient when I write the code, because it either suggests things for me to write, like if I write something and it can be improved, it can suggest it to me either on the spot or by running the integrated code analyzer tool. It can automatically generate things for me like constructors, setter or getter methods, and so on and so on. So it's a very powerful tool, and I think not many testers really use the power of the IDE. So there are many, many shortcuts and improvements that we can obtain for our code by using such an IDE. So this is very good. I highly recommend it. If you're new to IntelliJ, I have a course about it on Test Automation University that you can look up. So try it out. It's really, really good for your automation. I highly recommend it. So this would be my preferred setup. I hope this helps for those who have asked me about frameworks and tools and so on. And I will move to another question, which was, should I run tests in production, especially automated tests? And my answer is yes, you should run automated tests in production. No, you don't need to run every single test case that you have. So when it comes to creating automation for production, you need to think about doing a sanity for your features that you're releasing. It's not worth it going through everything, because you've already validated the functionality in probably 2, 3, 4 environments before you went to production. So you don't want to also pollute the database in production unless you have some special users or like some special way of keeping track of what you're doing and cleaning up after yourself. Usually cleans up in production are very, very tricky and sensitive. So you probably don't want to mess production up very, very, like a lot. Usually, especially if you're working on, high volume, high transaction volume types of products, you will have some kind of monitoring in place, because you need to have your machines available to the customers all the time. you can't really have any downtimes. So for that, monitoring is added in place by DevOps or developers, but the monitoring only helps so much. So it mostly checks for, is the server up? Is the server responding to the pings? They're not checking whether the functionality still works. So that's where you come in with your automated tests. That is why we need automated tests in production. First of all, we need to validate every release that is going out, right? We need to validate that what we are releasing is working in production. Even if it was working in the previous environment where you tested it, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to work in production. So it's really, really good to have a sanity, which you can run, frequently, maybe on a daily basis, maybe hourly, depends on what you're doing. But you do need to have automation in production because you do need to make sure that customers will not report that the site is down. You do that yourself way earlier and fix it by the time the customers get to your site. Okay, does automation uncover bugs? Yes. Now, the thing is, when you create your automation code, unless you're doing AI or something like that, you create a sequence of lines of code that execute, or you have, your steps in your codeless automation tools. These are basically a sequence of things that are executed, right? So you are doing something, you're clicking on a button, you're checking for some response, you're doing your stuff. You can uncover bugs in the code that you wrote. So if the sequence of your steps that was previously working is not working anymore because maybe, let's say, if it's the UI, a new pop-up appeared and you wanted to click on something and the pop-up is in the way, the test is going to say, oh, I cannot click on the button because there is a pop-up there. So this is how you catch the bug. It will not catch, for example, a bug when something that you're not testing has changed. It will only report on what you told it to report on, right? So the checks that you put in place will tell you if something is not working anymore in your own test, not in anything else for which you're not testing. It cannot detect anything around that because it doesn't have, some kind of, intelligence to tell you something else is not working. So automation does uncover bugs in your features, especially if, let's say, somebody else changed something that is affecting your features. Many times when you're going to production, for example, many teams are going at the same time. And maybe some of the code that somebody else is releasing wasn't for some reason tested in a previous environment. When you're running your test in production, you will see that there is a change, that your feature is not working as expected because of somebody else's change. Maybe some other teams changed, or maybe someone in your team changed something without letting you know. So your test can uncover bugs as long as the bugs are in the feature that you were actually testing. I hope this makes sense. How can you select what to automate? Well, if it comes to a new project where you're developing the features and you're testing, in the same sprint with the development, you should automate the code instead of doing the manual work for the features, directly do the automation for that feature that you're testing. If time is a restriction, then you should just pick the most relevant scenarios to automate at this time. Of course, the most important scenario to test is always the happy flow. So never, ever, ever forget the happy flow. I've seen it actually happen. If you don't have time to do the automation for everything else, just either create manual test cases for the rest of the tests, or create some Jira tickets for the future that you can take a look at when there's nothing else to be done, right? So you can come back to those tickets when there will be more time left. If it's an older project, for example, that's a maintenance project that nobody is currently developing on, you should start with the sanity. And the sanity should be chosen based on priorities. You should know which of your features are the most important ones for the customers, which bring the most revenue, which are the most frequently used, and so on. Based on this criteria, you should pick the most relevant scenarios and start automating those. Once you're done with those, pick the next the next ones when it comes to priority, and so on, until you're done with all of them. But always start with the most important, most valuable features. And sometimes another thing that you can consider is whether you're doing something frequently that takes a lot of time. For example, if you have a certain scenario that would normally take you 5 hours to do, and you need to do it like every day or every week, you could also include that in the automation goal, because it's going to save you time. So in that time, when you don't do the manual work, you can start doing something else instead. How can I automate when I'm a tester? Well, in this case, when you're working on something and you need to do the estimation for your task, you should give the estimation considering that you want to do it automatically from the start. So if a task is manually done in 1 hour, but it takes 1 day to do the automation for it, then just say it's going to take 1 day and just do the automation. And as I said earlier, create Jira tickets for all of those automation scenarios you don't have time to do right now. And in the future, in future sprints, maybe you have a technical sprint where developers are not working on new features but on tasks that are not requiring testing. You can pick some of these automation depth tickets, or like where there is some spare time in the sprint, like I don't know, developers are stuck because something is not working and they cannot give you for 2 days anything to test. That would be a good time to take some of these tickets and work on them and do your automation while they're figuring out, something else on their end. How about mocking data? So I'm not a big fan about mocking, because when you're doing mocking, you need to know exactly what you need to mock. You need to know all of the values that need to be mocked. For example, if you have an external service and it will give you some data, when you're doing the mocking, you need to cover all of the bases, all of the information that the service could give you. For that, you need to know really, really well what the service is doing. You need to know exactly what you need to mock. Otherwise, you might be testing something on a very, very wrong setup. Okay, and sometimes you're not even aware that you're mocking the wrong data because you don't have the correct documentation, maybe, or you cannot talk to the people whose service you're trying to mock. So in this case, it might be really, really bad for you. Sometimes it's easy. So sometimes it's good to do the mocking when you're absolutely sure that you're mocking the right thing. In this case, mocking can save a lot of time because, environments are not always working properly, and you don't necessarily care whether that service that you're trying to mock is really down or that it's not working properly or anything. You just wait. Actually, you don't care when it's going to come back and when it's going to work properly. You know the outcome, you know exactly what kind of data it will send you when it will be up. So in this case, if you're mocking it right, then it's going to be a time saver for you. Some interview questions. So you will probably, if you want to get hired as an automation, I cannot tell you exactly what you will be asked, but for sure you will be asked some of the following questions about the frameworks you will need to use at work. So people will be very interested if you can take on the task of automating with the tools they have available. Even if they're going to ask you some more complex questions, even if you don't really know all of the answers, they're just trying to understand, how 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 much adjustment period you need in order to get settled into the project. What are your strong points there? Maybe you're very good at maybe, let's say, API testing. Maybe they have a colleague who is very good at web testing, so maybe you can work together in order to do more complex scenarios and stuff like that. So they're really, really interested in your experience. So in this case, you should be really honest about what are your weak points and your strong points, so that they understand how to actually help you settle into the project. They will give you time to learn and so on, but they need to understand where you're coming from. Of course, they will need to understand how familiar you are with the domain. And this is usually this is not a problem. So even if you're not very familiar with a domain, this is usually learned. So when you're going into the automation job, you will not need all of the time to know the exact domain, because this is something they will train you on from the beginning. So that's not a problem. You just need to say, whether you've already worked in this domain, what is your experience with it, and so on. And you will also be asked about, projects that you have worked on. People will be interested in learning, what kind of architectures you've faced, whether you've done CI, CD, and so on. What was your contribution to the different projects? What was your role? And of course, like what were you doing? Were you doing automation? Stuff like that. So these are generally some categories of questions that you might get asked. I usually, when I do interviews, I just want to see, I just want to understand the background of the people, and I want to help them, when they come into the role, and I want to help them, get started properly and provide, the guidance and the documentation that they need in order to cover those areas that they're not very familiar with. And many times they can teach us, the interviewers, domains that they are very strong on that maybe we are not. So it's a trade-off, basically. But the thing that's important here is to be genuine and to be very honest about your experience. Some KPIs for measuring automation value. Well, I'm not a very huge fan of KPIs, but I can tell you what not to use as KPIs for measuring automation, meaning number of test cases, because test cases don't have the same complexity, they don't have the same number of steps, test cases generally don't really look like one another. So I don't find that KPIs that say, oh, number of test cases are very, very good for measuring your automation. Coverage, the same. Percentages of test failures, again, this can be for, like, if a test fails, it can be for too many various reasons. So this is not a very good information when it comes to KPIs, in my opinion. And again, number of defects found, no. Do you want to find a lot of bugs? If they are there, yes, you want to find them. If they aren't there, we don't want to find any bugs. So, this is like a very tricky one. Like, what do you want? Do you want the numbers to be okay? What is a good number? And so on. So for me, these are not very valid KPIs. And to me, like in 2020, it's a bit tricky to still question why we need automation, because yeah, we've seen it. It's been here for decades. So I think we should have already learned that, okay, automation is useful. You can actually, next slide, validate the same feature under different environment conditions. Because if you're running the same test 10 times, there might be some things different about the environment. Maybe at one point the database is down, and you will see what happens when the database is down. Maybe at one point something else is being done, like maybe a deployment, and you didn't know. And then you will see what happens when the deployment is being done while the users are on the site, and so on. Release validation is very, very important, and it helps, automation helps save hours, days, and so on with validating releases, because older features that are already automated can be retested easily by running the existing automation. And you don't have to actually manually sit there and do the test cases, because the automation runs in the pipeline, let's say, and the manual tester, or even the automation tester, can do something else in the meantime. Bug detection, as I mentioned earlier, detection of unavailability. So if you have tests running in production and the site all of a sudden goes down, your automation can pick it up and notify you really quick about that. So this is very good, and it's a very good way of being up to speed with what's happening in production. Validation of the same feature across all environments, of course, because even if we're talking about releases, when you're going into a release, you need to test across several environments. So doing the same manual work on 5 environments, and then finding a bug and doing it again on 5 environments and finding another bug and so on, can be really it's not very pleasant. So in order to avoid having to manually retest this like 100 times and being bored of it and sick and tired of it, you can just do the automation, and you can just switch the environments, run the tests, and everybody's happy, the tester is happy, and the tester can do something else in the meantime. Okay, so this is what I covered up to now. I do see we have some questions. Let's see, where should I start taking them from? Okay, let's start from the top. So, what are criteria to consider before we implement BDD in test automation? Will it be suitable in most project types like TestNG? Um, First of all, I'm not necessarily a fan of BDD because, from my opinion, BDD is just an extra layer on something you already have, which can be self-explanatory, self-sufficient, and so on. You can use it in projects like TestNG. I mean, I've seen it used before. From my perspective, it doesn't necessarily bring value to that. It's said that BDD helps product owners or business analysts interact with testers or with the testing, but I've never seen a product owner or a business analyst actually taking a look at the BDD stuff. So, yeah, this was the question. Okay, 1 second. Let's see. Do automation testers need to learn CI/CD tools? It depends. For example, if you want to create your own Jenkins jobs, and if you want to do the setup for them, you can learn these. Otherwise, it's not necessary. So I don't think it's a requirement, because most of the times there is someone who is actually doing that. There are dedicated people who are dealing with the CI/CD tools, so you don't necessarily have to do that.
So I wanted to have a follow-up question on this part as well, Corina. So
Yeah.
if like a automation tester wants to branch out, it's always a good practice to kind of learn more and more skills around your domain as well. It's never a bad idea to at least have understanding about how exactly that automation cycle is working. And of course, CI/CD platform is kind of a part of that automation cycle as well. So it's never a bad idea to invest in those kind of skills as well, correct?
Yes, it's never a bad idea to invest. It's never a bad idea to learn anything. So
Hmm.
learning only broadens your perspectives,
Hmm.
It helps you see, what else you can do. Like, if you learn something, maybe you won't like it, but at least you
Hmm.
are informed of possibilities that you can take up. So learning is very, very good. In this case too. Yeah.
So in your opinion, what do you think would be best tool sets around CI/CD pipeline that automation testers should first look into?
Sorry, can you repeat? What
So
are the?
yeah, in your opinion, what do you think would be the best tool sets around, let's say, CI/CD pipeline that as a novice automation tester should kind of try to look into first?
Mhm. So Jenkins is definitely one thing you can look into.
Hmm.
Um, I don't have some specific documentation right now,
Hmm.
but I can take a look at some of these things. But Jenkins is the most used one, definitely. There
Hmm.
are other tools there. For example, Travis CI is another CI tool that works really easy.
Hmm.
I have it integrated in some of my GitHub projects.
Hmm.
But yeah, this would be Jenkins is the most used one, definitely.
Awesome, awesome. Certainly. It's again open source platform and very heavily used by both startups and enterprise alike, right? So yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So we can move to
Um,
the next question, right?
Yeah, I'm going to just quickly answer one here from the chat. What are the most valuable, effective training sources, resources? So, as I mentioned, Test Automation University,
Mhm.
where there are online courses which are for free, and there are on various topics, and they are easy to follow. So, some of them are from 30 minutes to like 3 hours or something, and they're very good because they also have quizzes, and there's usually also a GitHub project to follow along. So you can actually do the code, write the code while you're doing or you're looking at the tutorials.
All right. I would also like to recommend checking out LambdaTest as well. So we have a blog where we usually publish a lot of posts around automation testing, kind of a tutorial post around automation testing, different frameworks, different CI/CD platforms. So it would be a plus. And in addition, we also have a very great documentation section where you will find a lot of material on getting started. So we have a GitHub repository around that part as well. So feel free to check out LambdaTest blogs and LambdaTest documentation and the LambdaTest GitHub page, right? So you would find a lot of stuff to at least start off with the automation testing from there.
Yes, yes, please do that. Okay, how many questions, or like several more minutes, or?
Yeah, we have 7 to 5 more minutes. We can take 2 or 3 more questions.
Okay, so let's see. I will just pick some. Sorry about which ones I'm going to pick. I'm just going to focus on the time right now.
Awesome.
So, is Linux important for testers to learn?
Mhm.
In my experience, you don't necessarily need to learn a lot of Linux, but it's useful to know some of the basic things. Um, for example, I would use it only for checking logs or to verify the state of the application. So I wouldn't necessarily do very complex things for Linux. I would just go onto the machine and just check it for certain things that would help me validate, that everything is working fine. Apart from that, I never had to do that. So I don't think it's necessarily, unless you actually have that, like in your job description, or like if somebody's really asking you to do that. And if so, you'll find out there, like on the spot. I don't think it's very important. No. But the minimum, at least the minimum, should be good and would be useful. Okay, let's see. What automation test that most challenging that you have facing until now? Um, you know what's really challenging? When you have maintenance types of applications where you don't have the source code, you don't have support, you don't have anything at your disposal. You just need to do automation, and you don't even have requirements. You don't even know what you're looking at. So you need to kind of, first of all, you need to try to figure out how the application works. For that, you need to try to do all kinds of, use cases, and to consider probably that, the steps that you have followed were correct, and that there is no bug in the system. You don't really know whether there is a bug or there is no bug. Like, you just need to do automation, but you don't have any clear requirements. You don't have any documentation. You don't have um, anyone to support you in doing that. So that is like really tough to do, really tough. And in that case, what you need to do is to actually find someone who can tell you exactly how the software needs to work. Sometimes you might have the official documentation that is going to tell you that, and sometimes you don't, because the documentation is very generic, and it's not going to tell you exactly what you're looking for. It's just going to be like, yeah, you just need to do this, but it doesn't tell you what are the steps in doing that. So that kind of a project is very tricky to automate. So I hope I will not have to do that ever. Yep. Okay, let's see if I can take another one. Okay, let's take the first one here. So, what is the best practice, including frequency, for maintenance in automated testing? The first thing I need to mention here is, if you have automated tests, and the feature that you're testing has changed, do update those tests. It's really shameful to see the tests just lying there, not used, um, failing constantly, simply because somebody didn't update the tests after the feature was updated. That's really sad. So once you created your tests, take care of them. You can even sometimes you can even refactor them after a while, after you created them, because if you have a better way of doing the code you already created, you should do that. If it's faster, or if it's, less code, or if there is any improvement that you can apply to your older tests, do that. But never let them become, flaky. Never let them become, just something you will throw away. If you created them, and if they bring value to your product, you should really take care of them, just like developers take care of the code. Whenever there is an update to the software, they should be a corresponding ticket for updating the tests. So if the developers are working on it, you should also have the time to work on it and update it. Yeah, I hope that answered the question, and I think I will stop here so we can do the closing part.
We can take one or two more questions. There is no hard
Okay,
stop to this.
okay. Let's see another one. So we answered this one. Thank you very much for your questions. Um, yeah, I don't know about the about the automating a video call, but I can take a look and maybe um, share that on social media. What is the most important things to evaluate test automation framework? Number of times test cases running. Well, I think the most important thing to evaluate is whether your tests are passing successfully when the feature under test is working fine. Many times we create tests, let's say during the sprint. We have something that we're working on, we have a feature that we're working on, and we have only an amount of time allocated because we did the estimation, it's going to take 3 days, then we need 3 days to finish. If the tests are not stable after those 3 days, we need to spend more time to make sure they are stable. Stable means if the environment is working fine, if the functionality is working fine, every time you rerun the test, you need to have the same outcome. If the tests pass every time, you're good. If the tests randomly fail, then there's something you still need to fix about that. There is adjustments that you need to do, okay? So you need to spend some time to polish those tests until they properly work, okay? You don't want to have tests that randomly fail because then everybody will say that the test automation was not done properly, that it's, crap, we should throw it away and so on. So the most important thing in evaluating the test framework is its reliability. It needs to be predictable in its runs. So every time you run it, you need to know that if the software was working fine, it's going to pass. If the software was not working fine, it's going to fail, and it's going to tell you, the reason why it failed. That would be my answer. Okay. And I think, let's see, one more. Post-COVID, what should QAs invest on learning now? I really don't know. Like, there are so many things that we can learn. There are all kinds of technologies out there. We should focus on learning what will help improve and ease our work, so that we spend less time doing the hard work and more time doing the fun work. Okay, this is my very general answer that I will end this webinar with.
Awesome, awesome. So I think we are at the time limit as well. So we can end this here. So first, Corina, I would really want to thank you for helping us out with this webinar and answering all the important questions. I'm really helpful that we learned so much a lot today from your experience, and I'm quite sure the people who are asking questions have got a chance to kind of learn something today as well, right? So, but also all the people who are attending this webinar, thank you all for taking your time out and attending this webinar and making it a success. We usually conduct a webinar every month. So feel free to subscribe to our channel, and we would be going live with another webinar very soon. And do check out LambdaTest.com as well. It is a automation testing platform that will help you increase your browser test coverage. If you're running a Selenium based test, you can run those tests at 2000 plus different browsers and operating systems across board. And we also have you can also run those tests in parallel, so that would mean that you can cut down on your overall test execution time, right? So we have more than 100,000 plus users who are already using our platform, and the best thing about our platform is that we have like integration with all the CI/CD platforms, and we have a 24/7 technical support. So do check out LambdaTest as well. And with that note, I want to end this webinar, and really glad that you guys able to join us. If you have any more questions for us or for Corina as well, feel free to reach out at support@lambdatest.com, or at the website we have an in-app chat support as well. Feel free to ask any question over there, and we would be happy to help you out in the future. Right. Again, thanks for Corina for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you everyone for participating, and have a great day.
Have a great day ahead, everybody. Bye bye.